This video looks at question 1 of the language paper, and question 1 is always a reading question, and the reading question is always the same. It's always a question that invites you to summarise. Now it's worth pausing a moment and thinking about what the English exam is trying to do. It's aimed at A star to D, and that means that candidates who are getting a D and a C need to get some marks quickly in the exam, and these marks are intended to be gathered in question 1. Unfortunately, there's a big problem. Although it's the easiest question, summarising is the easiest skill, because English teachers spend a long time training their students in much more advanced skills, they actually end up very bad at this question. And the examiner's reports tell us that. I'll show you that a little bit later. Let me talk you through the problems that you might have with this question using a past question. So here we are. The day I survived a very grisly bear attack was the title of the piece of writing that candidates had to read. And here's the question. Using details from the article, outline concisely, and concisely means not using many words, what you learn about black bears. And I've highlighted that as my first key thing I've got to find out about. The different thoughts and feelings, and so that's my second thing, the thoughts and feelings. And whose are they? They belong to Guy Grieve, that he experiences during his encounters with the bear. Use your own words as far as possible. So the first thing I notice is there are two things that I have to write about, and these are helpfully displayed for me with bullet points. The examiner is begging me to do the right thing and making it as easy as possible. So what's the difficulty? Well, one major difficulty is that you're in an exam, this is your first question, and you end up summarising absolutely everything in the article instead of focusing on these two key things. So the first job that you have in the exam is to highlight, as I have done, the key words in the question that tell you what to do. Now I haven't highlighted this bit here, use your own words as far as possible, because that is always the same. Every question 1 has that. Whatever year you take the paper, that will always be a requirement not to quote. So let's look at some advice from the examiner. It's important for candidates to remember that this is a summary and therefore primarily a test of retrieval skills. So if I had to rank reading skills, retrieval, the ability to find a bit of information in a passage or a text and tell somebody what it is, that's actually the easiest thing to do. You know, a year 5 and year 6 child would do this very easily. So again, well, why is it so difficult for GCSE students? Well, because this exam is a test of your exam skills just as much as it's a test of your reading skills. Now I know that sounds unfair, but once you know that, you can think, right, I'm going to prepare for the rules of the exam. And I'm going to suggest to you that about 50% of your marks are about knowing the right rules and playing the right game. And they're not actually about English at all. But the good news is those rules can be learnt really quickly, and with a little bit of practice you can get them right nearly every time. So here's another heavy hint. You will be asked to write clearly on specific topics. There they were, black bears and thoughts and feelings, not everything in the passage. Then you'll be asked to give an overview look. And top candidates will illustrate with an overview. And that again means you don't have to write about everything. And now here's the killer. They did not illustrate the overview of the subject matter required to access the highest mark bands that their understanding suggested was within their reach. In other words, when the examiner reads the candidate's writing, they can tell that the candidate has understood everything in the passage, but they're still not getting the mark because they haven't turned that understanding into a piece of writing that is an overview and is a summary. So let's look at the other advice that will help you to do that. What does a successful result candidate's answer look like? The most successful responses are subdivided to focus on the two key aspects. You'll remember those, facts about the bear and the thoughts and feelings. and they avoided the inclusion of irrelevant details. So the rest of the stuff in the passage you ignore. Less successful responses tended to write at length without clear focus on the requirements of the task. In other words, they just summarised and they ignored the 2 bullet points. And you'll remember I said the examiner is bending over backwards here and here to tell you exactly what to write about. And if you're calm, you will spot that straight away. Other candidates would write about the photograph on the page, and you'll remember that's something you have to do for question 2, and never in question 1. Question 1 is always a summary. And here another hint, what does a summary mean? The examiner wants a sufficient overview. Well, here's another warning. In general, assessors were of the opinion that although there were some very good answers indeed, this was the question that offers most scope for improvement in the performance of candidates. So a huge mystery for them here. It's the easiest question, but the one that most candidates do least well in. And so another reminder, it is a summary question. And this examiner is suggesting, because it's a summary question, you need to find a reliable summary writing method. Well, I have a very easy method. If I'm reading through the passage, every time I notice that something is about the bears, I would write a B next to that, and every time I notice something was a thought and a feeling, I might write an F for feeling, or TF next to that. And that would be very quick. I'd do that as I read. This examiner is suggesting you do something a bit more complicated, as I'll show you. Because question 1 will always identify a specific area or areas, the method that I've just shown you will always work. You can invent a code for those 2 areas and just annotate your paragraphs really quickly with that letter. You don't actually have to write anything. This examiner suggests something different. He suggests making notes. A recommended approach to answering it successfully is to read the passage carefully, focusing on and making notes of the points directly relating to the elements identified in the question, those 2 areas we've talked about, ensuring that the full range of these elements is covered, and then, and this is the tricky bit, reorganizing these points into an appropriate order. So I think you could do that directly from the passage with just your little code. You may not even have to reorganize them. You could just choose the order that they're presented in. However, I do have a top tip for you here. The most important element will often be at the end, and you can easily show that you're reordering them by using that most important element in your first sentence. Your first sentence will then introduce all the others. That will show that you're making a summary, and it will also show that you're concentrating on the specific areas. So that to me seems a much better shorthand method, but by all means try out the examiner's one here and see if it works for you. Obviously this will take you a lot longer to write, and he has a further bit of advice here. Do not be over concerned about this being a time-consuming process. Section A tests reading, and it's therefore important that time is spent in practicing this important skill. I'm not convinced by that advice. I'm going to tell you a very brief story. When GCSEs first included exams about 18, 19 years ago, I asked my head of department, who was a chief examiner, how I should prepare my students, because previously they'd just written 100% coursework. And he said, well, you've really got to make sure they make notes all over what they're reading in order to organise their ideas. And I tried this out for myself. I actually sat the exam with my students to see what it was like, and I completely ran out of time. I only just managed to finish, and I've got a degree in English. And it was completely the wrong advice. You don't have enough time to write all over the paper. However, a little code will certainly help you. There is a little word of warning from the examiners. Assessors noted that candidates who scored most highly had usually taken the time to make such notes. I have no reason to believe that he's lying, but I still prefer my method of just a quick code to do it more quickly. Right, next we have a bit of advice down here which is incredibly useful and not really contentious, not something that I'd argue with. A fully successful response to question 1 in this paper would have been written in no more than 200 words, and that for many of you is probably about 20 lines. But what should be in those 200 words? A dozen focus points, so 12 points, and then make sure those are evenly distributed between the two elements of the question. So a very quick shorthand is to go back to the question and say, I've got 2 bullet points, then I'm going to need 6 points for that bullet point and 6 points for that, and then I'm done. A very easy shorthand. And so remember, you're writing 200 words, you're trying to make about 12 points, and you're bound to get top marks if you do so. There is another little warning here. This idea that you have to use your own words doesn't mean that you have to end up substituting words. The examiners don't want that. They just want it to be mostly your own words, and that means not quoting. Don't bother to quote because that will cost you marks. You're just trying to summarize in your own words. Well, that was 2011. What's the advice in 2012? Again, performance on this task continues to be uneven, so students are still spending much too much effort quoting in this, writing about the writer's purpose instead of just summarizing. Only use 200 words. There's that word concisely again. Use as few words as possible. Deliver a wide range of points. That's our 12 points that we've talked about. Be well organized, and I'm suggesting you can do that by taking the last point, the most important one in the text, and using that as the first point in your summary, and that will give you a synthesis. Synthesis just means bringing it all together. Candidates who wrote at excessive length didn't get any extra marks. Their responses became unbalanced. Select material, again that's just your 12 points, and summarize it, but not the entire article, just the points you've been asked questions on. And so it's good to know that year on year the examiners are offering the same advice, and that advice is still good. Again, there's a warning not to write about the language. That's something that you do in question 2 and 3. That sort of critical comment, the examiner's getting quite angry here, has no place in question 1. In other words, don't bother with it. Then there's a lovely little example to stop you from really struggling to use your own words and translating things. So he's got this example of 11-year-old school children being called prepubescent scholars and a helicopter being referred to as a rotary flying device. You know, you really don't have to struggle to get the marks here. You can use this language because nothing better will do. The key thing is that you avoid quotation, and not of single words but of lines. So I hope that's made you feel a lot more confident. The examiner's singing from the same hymn sheet each time. But let me go back to this point here. Examiners felt that most candidates had a secure understanding of the passage, but that their understanding of the requirements of the task was less secure. And the task is the exam. And I started this video by saying 50% of your marks were just on the exam technique, not on your knowledge of English, your understanding. And the examiner's report backs that up. You've got to write a summary of the key points, not the whole article. That's it. You don't quote, you don't have to do anything intelligent. I should possibly have written something about your note-taking, but I'm sure you can remember that. You need to try out different ways of doing this question to find which one works for you. So, good luck in your exam, and the next video will be about question 2.